All right, good morning. So today we're just going to focus on one class, which is flight class, which we're going to do from scratch. And as you may have just heard me explaining, mostly I'm going to have you do the coding, and the ninjas and I will walk around and help you out with that. So in designing, you should open the flight.py file, which is mostly empty. We'll start filling it in a little bit, and then I'll have you do some with it. So the flight class is one flight, airplane flight from one place to another. So the data in the class will be the origin airport, like where it's going from, destination airport, where it's going to. Those will be strings, the fare, which will be the price of the flight, and that's a float, and then the number of available seats, which is an integer. And so I don't know that we'll do all of these things class today for a while, but we'll have you write various methods. We want accessors, variables. We do want to be able to change the fare so that the price of the flight might change. We also want to be able to the number of seats that are available, so we'll purchase seats, double seats down, and then constructor and represent. That's a string. So you should be able to see this. Oops. Here. And what I'll do is I'll write kind of some starter code on the here in VS Code, and to get us all kind of synced up, and then let you start writing some things. So the things that it says, like the goals for the flight class, it's basically just what was on the screen. And then it starts the definition of the flight class. But down here, let's put the main method that's going to test the flight class. Whoops. So for the main method, it's going to test the flight class. I do want to create a flight object, so I'll say f equals flight. The first argument, and I'll also write this on the board as you're typing. The first argument is going to be the origin airport, where it's going from. So we'll say PHL, which is Philadelphia Airport. And then the second argument to the constructor will be the destination, where we're going. So Honolulu is nice this time of year, I guess, or any time of year for that matter. So HNL is the airport code for Honolulu. I don't know how much a flight to Honolulu is, but I'm going to say it's expensive. Let's say, Philly, I don't know, $1,300 maybe? I don't know. And on the flight, there are 180 available seats. Then what I want to do is I want to print, well, doesn't matter. I'll print the origin and destination. So it goes from %d, sorry, %s to %. Yeah. Origin. Of course, this code doesn't work yet because I haven't flight class yet. But this is the code we're going to start with to test it before we implement it. You might notice on line 26, it's unhappy about def being here. That's because there's nothing in the flight class and it's confused, but that'll go away. And then there was this thing up here on line 18. It says call main only if blah, 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 blah. So this is the part where the ninjas may need to help. I'm just going to, you're with me, I'm going to copy this so I don't have to type the whole thing. Colon, and then call me. And so what this is doing is that, like, when we run the program, work right now. when we run the program, this variable underscore main, or will be equal to this string here, and then it will call the main function. We'll create our flight 7 and stuff online. So what I would like you to do is start to implement the flight class so that lines 27 and 20 work. You implement the flight class so that base flight object on line 27, and so that it correctly prints the origin and destination, PHL and HNL, on line 28. Hint, you need to implement 3 methods in order to do this. So I'll give you a couple of minutes for that. The ninjas and I will walk around. I will also write it on the board so we can refer to it later. Sometimes, yeah, I see.
More than her room.
Yeah.
Like her hotel stay.
Right. So maybe in a minute or so, I'll go over the 3 methods you need to write for this. It feels like let's kind of understanding it, which is great. Not close to anything, but I will walk us through all of it. If you need to write a note, many of you have already done it, but if you're also like not really sure what needs to go here, that's okay. We have plenty of time for practice, plenty of examples for practice. So I am going to remove these comments, and I'll point out that in order to get what's currently line 27 to work, we need the function, or the method that's called when we create the object, and that's the constructor. Notice that on line 23, I have it indented. So I saw some folks had it not indented. They had it like over here, and hence the red line under the word def. It didn't like that. The main function on line 26 is not part of the class definition. That's why it's not a function for 11 weeks now. But the constructor and all these other methods are part of the method of the class. The constructor has to be called underscore underscore init underscore underscore. So the constructor, the method is called when we create the object, and it must be called underscore underscore init underscore underscore. And then even though on the board it looks like there are 4 arguments to the constructor, which I guess is true, the constructor has to have 5. In this case, 5 parameters. The first one being self, which refers to this object. Stephanie pointed out that it doesn't have to be called self. Call parameters anything we want, but the convention is to refer to this as self, and it must be the first parameter. So even though it looks like it's origin destination pair, number of available seats, the first parameter has to refer to this object. Then I'll have parameters, which again I can call whatever I want. In fact, I can call the instance variables whatever I want, because no other code is using these instance variables. They're only using the methods. So I am going to do something like I'll say orig dest. What was the other one? Fair. F, and number of seats, num. And the reason I'm doing that is that I want to differentiate, make it really clear, differentiate the instance variable versus the parameter. So the parameter only lives for the execution of this function. If you think about the stack diagram that we saw all along, or on Wednesday, right, the parameters are in the stack frame for the constructor function, but then they go away afterwards, but the object itself does not. Now I might say something like, oh, okay, on the slide, it said that we're going to have an instance variable called origin, so I might say origin equals orig. But all that does is create a local variable on the stack called origin. So orig is already on the stack. With line 24 that we've written it, all that does is create a local variable also on the stack that's not part of the class. So in order to get it to be part of the class, I do need to say self.origin. Also, I don't want you to get dinged on stuff like this. You are supposed to have a comment, so let's have good practices. Practice here. Constructor or like class. I think you'll see this in some of the example code that we provide, kind of like this one-line function header. But we do expect you to have that for all the different methods. And then we're going to do the same for the other instance variables, which, again, I can call these instance variables anything I want. I should call them things that make sense, like available seats or number of available seats. Probably call it available seats. Available. So as we talked about on Wednesday, the left side of each assignment statement is modifying the object or the instance variable in that object using the values that are passed as arguments. This method doesn't return anything. I think the example that we did the other day with employee had a return at the end of the constructor. It doesn't matter if you have it there, but it's not returning self. It's just ending, which I guess return does. But this is how we set the instance variables using the constructor. I'm gonna I'm gonna change this a little bit to make a point. Let's say that another thing I want to do in my flight class is count like how many people have bought tickets. And so I can buy multiple tickets so that I can reduce the number of available seats by 3 or 4 or whatever, depending on how much I buy. But let's say the number of people who have purchased tickets, so the number of purchases. So I can say self.num purchases because I want to keep track of how many people have made a purchase. So num purchases is going to be so it's different from available seats, which is kind of counting down. Num purchases going up, but every time someone makes a purchase, let's say, num purchases go up. Now you might say, uh-oh, like we need to change what's now line 32 to initialize this. We need to change line 23. But no, I don't want to pass an initial number of purchases. I can just set it to 0. So I don't want you to think that in the constructor, all I can do is move parameters into instance variables. That's not true. In the constructor, I can do any code that I want. I can call other functions. I can, I can have loops or whatever, and I can initialize variables using literal value.
Could we also usually check here if the thing is I imagine that with the wrong type and
Yeah. So the point is this the place where we would usually check things like the type? So in the earthquake example, you may remember that if you passed something in the constructor, if you passed it like a string and it was expecting a number, you would get some kind of error. That would happen here. You can imagine that maybe you can't have a negative fare, can't have a negative available seat, and then maybe we want to have some error message and maybe not create the object. Fortunately, in this class, we haven't seen how to do that. We can certainly print, I can certainly say, like, if f less than 0, print an error message, but I can't stop it from creating a flight, which is probably something we do want to do. So I don't think we'll have to deal with that in this class, but that's where this would happen. What other questions do you have about the flight constructor? Then, in order to get line 33 to work, we need a get origin method and we need a get destination method, which presumably return the origin and destination. So those are lined up with the def on line 23, and we'll say def get origin. And I know even on line 35 and on the board, it looks like, oh, get origin doesn't take inputs and parameters. It does. There's this implicit parameter self, which refers to this object. The point, oh, sorry. Put a comment here, return the value. And it is surely tempting to simply say return origin. VS Code puts a yellow line under that, or at least for me it does, because it's like, that's probably not what you meant. If we think about the stack for the get origin method, there is no variable called origin. You might say, oh, okay, oh, sorry, what it meant was orig. There's no variable called orig either, even though it was a parameter up here. Hopefully by now, with all the stack diagram examples and such, we know that orig lives in the constructor stack range, but no variable being created in the get origin method. So this should be self dot origin. So self meaning this object, and its origin. Well, if it works that way for get origin, then I'm gonna guess it works that way for get destination. So I'm just gonna copy paste this. So we'll just change this to get destination. Stop here. So I mentioned for this example, in order, and I know some of you have gone farther, which is fantastic, but for this example, we need 3 methods. One is the constructor for what's on line 40 now. We'll create the object and initialize the instance variables. Then getter methods, or get that, which will return the values of those instance variables. What questions do you have about the constructor, getter methods, self? What questions do you have about a self? What is a self? What questions do you have about this stuff? So I've been informed by the people in the back that a flight from Philadelphia to Honolulu is not actually $1,300. I apparently have no idea how money works. How much is a flight from Philadelphia to Honolulu, more or less? 700. Okay, so we want to change the value of the fare. And what we're going to do is have this method called setFare. So I'd like you to now implement this method setFare, but we're not going to allow for negative fares. So don't change fare if it's negative. In this case, obviously it's not. In this case, obviously the fare is not negative. But when you implement the setFare method, I want you to implement it such that it doesn't change the fare if the new fare. What do I mean by it? If the new fare is negative, but otherwise change it to whatever this is. Yeah, yeah.
just return error. No, that's self. No, no, you go to self plus.
Yeah. Where the object would be. Yeah, so I found something up in that.
Oh, okay.
Mutate. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know. It's like. Check.
Ask questions now.
Soon there will be no more computer science. Yes. We'll say one more minute for the set pair method. But I didn't explicitly say this product of it. But when we have like the set method, typically the assumption is it doesn't return. And I suppose you could have something like we could return true or false, depending if we were able to change the fare or something. But what's called the mutator method or the set method, the setter method would typically not return anything. That's why, like line 43, I'm not assigning a variable to have a return value for this, printing anything. And the set fare method would have to go within our flight class here, so it'd be lined up with all the others. And surely you're going to hear me say this numerous more times, right? It feels tempting to say there's only one parameter, which is the new fare. But every method, well, it's not, but in our case, every method is going to have self. Because, actually, because we're calling it on this object, and so we do always have this implicit parameter that refers to self. So the first fare will be, the first parameter will be self, and then the second one will be, we'll call it like the new fare. And sets fare, but only if new fare is. Can you have a zero? Can you have a free flight? I guess so. Yeah, so let's say non-negative. Non-negative being 0 or positive. And again, it may be tempting, say fare equals new underscore fare, and you know that seems reasonable. I don't see any, yellow lines. And I've been told that what I see and what you see on the screen is not necessarily what everybody sees on their computer. I don't know how that happened. But in this case, like maybe you can see that new fare, there's like a little gray box behind it, indicating that with this this variable here is the same as this parameter here, which is what I want. But over here, this fare on the left is not the instance variable. It is a local variable in this function, its method. And that's not what we want. We want to change this object's fare. So for definitely not the last time, it's self.fare. We're changing this object's fare. So it is a little bit sneaky, because if it just said fare equals new fare, it would be fine. But that's not changing this object's fare. It's changing the local variable in this. Then you might say, well, wait, what about this non-negative part, right? So let's only do this if new fare greater than or equal to 0. Oh, greater than 0. I guess we're allowed. We now have free flights on our airport. No, wait, sorry, greater than or equal to 0. Yeah, whatever. If your Python brain is telling you we need an else statement, then please keep in mind that we do not always have to have an else statement for our if statements. You might be inclined to say something like else self.fare equals self.fare. Please do not do that. Self.fare equals self.fare does nothing. It just sets the variable to itself. We don't need that. So what's here is totally fine. What questions do you have about it? Yeah. Yeah, right. So maybe I said out loud that we should, but forgot to put it in the code, that we should have an error here. So otherwise, print like, hey, can't have a negative fare. Yeah, I think I did say that. Oh, I think the instructions at the top. Who knows? So, and then lastly, note that there's no return statement, meaning it's not return, but there's no expectation that it's returning, not returning there or anything. What questions do you have about this set fare method? The next one we're going to do is, I think on the slide I called it claim seats, but I'm going to call it purchase seats. And here's how this is going to work. So I'm going to say total equals f dot purchase seats. And just me and my wife, so 2 people are going. And this is the expectation of the purchase. Actually, okay, so on line 52, I'm going to have, and I'll write it on the board too. Total equals f dot purchase. And this is, I'll get it started and I'll have you do it. So def purchase seats. The first parameter will always be self, and then QTY for quantity, the number of seats. So this method is going to do 3 things. This method is going to do 3 things. One, reduce the number of available seats by quantity, right? So if I'm buying 2 seats, now there are 2 fewer seats. 2, increment by 1. Increment typically means by 1, but I'll write it by 1. well, I'll say increment the number of purchases, right? And I'm just going to scroll up here, right? That was this variable on line 29. Increment the number of purchases by 1. So every time someone purchases seats, the number of available seats goes down by however many they purchase. But the number of purchases, which can be more than one seat, goes up by 1. And then this will return the total cost, which is the fare times the quantity. So take a couple of minutes to implement this method. If it makes you happy to put error handling into this, that would be fine. I guess the error handling would primarily be you can't buy a negative number of seats. It's just one line of code, I guess. I guess it should just be 3 lines of code, he says, without having done it. Pretty sure. Give that a try. Oh, right. You can't buy more seats than are available. That's a future problem. No, that's actually not true, right? Airlines overbook flights. So
That's true.
yeah,
Yeah.
probably buy like a reasonable amount. Right.
I think it's usually.
Our airline does not have any such qualms about overbooking flights. So you can purchase as many, and every time you purchase seats, the price goes up. That we should also put that policy in. That's the Amtrak policy.
I feel like airlines is not as. Sometimes it goes down.
Yeah.
I don't know how they.
Market demands and so on, whereas Amtrak has a. If you want to take the train to Washington D.C., there's only one train going to Washington D.C.
By a day of, they charge. Right.
Exactly.
2 months before, they charge you $6.
Exactly. That's why I bought tickets to New York for like the next year. They're like
Because
$10.
if you get flexibility, they just can't.
Right.
I mean, the ones in New York are always $50.
You buy it in far enough in advance.
Yeah.
It's like
I've
10
kept
to
like 3
$13.
months in advance
Yeah.
of here.
Well, I mean, coming back.
I
No
wanna
one wants to
fly.
leave. Yeah, you got to go 5 a.m. or
Going there, though, that's what I
Yeah.
always do. Especially over the summer. It's more expensive.
yeah.
It's true.
Thanks a lot. Surprising.
Oh, you're not thinking that. That's the problem.
I think they like flying from this SF always more
I tried to
expensive
do
than
like
flying from
one of the things like guy type and guys.
Like the lack of typing sounds makes me think that we're either done or we're done. So, okay, so to reduce the number of available seats by the quantity, right, as has been discussed numerous times, we do need to use the variable self, and the number of available seats is this variable here, available underscore seats. So self dot available even fills it in for me, right? Available seats equals self dot available seats minus quantity. So by reducing the number of available seats, I mean take however many are currently available, and then subtract the quantity and then put that back into this variable. To increment the number of purchases by 1, I mean self dot, and it's showing me the different variable. So I don't know what these are supposed to be, brick or something. I don't know what that is, but showing the instance variables, and the purple box is the method. So I want noun purchases equals self dot noun purchases plus 1. So I'm not incrementing it by the quantity, but rather by 1, just to indicate that 1 more purchase was made of this flight. And then return the total cost, which is the fare. Well, remember, again, as always, return. As always, we want to access the instance variable. Whoops. Fare times quantity. what questions do you have about? I have a question for you. Why is it not self dot quantity? Why is it not self dot quantity? Right? Like, aren't we just sticking self in front of every variable now? No, because the instance, sorry, the flight object does not have a quantity. The quantity is only used a parameter, and it only exists for the purpose method. And that's why I'm just treating it as a regular variable when I use that line 4, because it is not part of this class. Another way to think of it as, like here, either way, when I say available seats, I still want it to be like the same variable that was set up here. So it needs to be part of self. But I'm not accessing the quantity in any other method. I'm only accessing the quantity in this method because this is the only place where I need it. The last thing we'll do is print the flight. And on line 64, I say print F. Before that, I'm just going to put an empty line. So what's now line 64 just prints an empty line. And then I'm going to run this, and I want you to see what it looks like. And then we'll come back and be like, okay, we want it to look nicer. So if we go and run this code, and if I haven't made any typos, we can see that this was the line from PHL to HTML. That's where I printed the origin destination, then it's blank line. And then when I tried to print the flight object, so again, on line 65, I said print F. What comes out is this. Not seeing that useful, but it actually is telling us that this is the address memory of that computer where that data, the flight object is stored. That is not what I want. I want it to say something like, information about the flight. So in order to get it to print information about the flight, we saw this last time that this is the same as print f dot underscore underscore str underscore underscore. So when I pass an object, line 65, I pass an object to the print function, it knows through whoever wrote this print function, it knows call the str function. If we're not calling str, nothing stops us from doing that, but we don't need to do that. The print function, which is part of Python, is doing that for us. However, if I want it to look nice, and I don't want it to look like this, then I need to implement this function. So let's do that. So this, again, is part of the flight class. And we'll put a comment here, called when we try to print the object. And aside from the funny name, and aside from the first parameter being self, the thing you must remember is that this returns a string. It does not print a string. The printing is happening on line 69 now. The printing is happening here. This is not printing. It is returning the string that gets printed. So we'll say return and s. So source, origin to destination, costs, cent, sorry, $, cent, 2. And so what I'm going to have this do is say, like, return, PHL to HNL costs whatever whatever it costs now. And we could also include the other instance variables. So in this case, on line 68, or 58 rather, on line 58, when I attempt to print the flight, I want it to say, origin to destination costs, the fare, and then remember the 0.2f means to two decimal places, so it's like dollars and cents. And you can say whatever you want. I could reformat this. I could include the number of available seats, the number of purchases, and so on. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. When you do lab 11, that's the lab that'll come out next week. It will tell you what's expected when you print the objects. But the point being that this method is called when I try to print it, and now if I run this, now I do see it in the format that I wanted. This nice. What questions do you have about the string method? All right, so it's not, I didn't end class super early, but technically early. So please be sure to shut everything down. So lab 10, just keep in mind the stack diagram part is due at the start of class on Monday, which I guess means whatever time you roll in. Sometime around there. But the code part 2 is due Sunday, and then there is a quiz, one more left, a week from today, which we'll talk about a little bit. All right, have a nice weekend.